Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menashe. On today's show, we're talking about why interest rates will continue to rise until more people lose their jobs. It sounds strange to say this, but the Fed wants to see people lose their jobs. And on today's show, I'm going to describe why that is. On yesterday's show, we reviewed a new book written by Ben Bernanke, former chairman of the Federal Reserve. It was only after reading that book that I fully understood the comments being made by current Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. There are two mandates at the Federal Reserve. Number one, to help the economy achieve full employment, and number two, to maintain financial stability in markets, including price stability. That second mandate really means managing inflation. It's no secret we're experiencing a global inflation phenomenon, and it's not limited to the U.S. But there's a theory that when inflation becomes entrenched, then the expectation of inflation becomes much more difficult to overcome. The result is a wage and price spiral. We are now seeing employees demanding cost of living adjustments to cope with inflation. These adjustments were not happening on a large scale in 2021, but we're now seeing both individual and collective agreements where employees are seeing wage gains in excess of 10%. The theory goes back to the inflationary period of the 1970s and 1980s. In those days, the expectation of inflation became entrenched in society and a wage-price spiral took hold. Prices increased and employees demanded higher pay in order to keep up. Higher wages would translate into higher expenses, which eventually drove higher prices in an endless cycle. When the economy has full employment, employees have leverage to demand higher wages. There are simply too many job openings and too few people looking for work. We see that all over the current environment. Restaurants are turning away customers because they don't have enough cooking staff. People's front lawns are growing long because lawn care companies can't seem to find employees. Hospitals are hiring contract traveling nurses because they can't find enough full-time nurses to cover their basic needs. Help wanted signs are pervasive in the current retail environment. Unemployment is currently at 3.6%. This is the lowest unemployment rate since the 1950s. Unemployment below 4% is considered to be full employment. So the economists at the Fed know that until unemployment jumps to maybe 5 or 6%, we're going to continue to see an upward spiral on both wages and prices. So the Fed is going to continue to increase interest rates and reduce liquidity to slow the economy and hopefully reduce the amount of hiring until unemployment increases to break the inflationary cycle between wages and prices. The question is, where did all these people go? Why are there no lifeguards applying for summer jobs at the local swimming pool? Why are there not enough managers from McDonald's and Walmart stores? Where did they all go? Yes, many were laid off during the pandemic. But if we look at workforce participation in the U.S., we can see that participation has fallen from 67% in the late 1990s to 63% by 2015. Much of that decline is a demographic shift as our aging population are retiring. Workforce participation increased over the last few years prior to the pandemic in 2018 and 2019 as more young workers entered the workforce. And during the pandemic, workforce participation fell precipitously in a matter of weeks from 63% to 60%, and it's slowly been recovering, about two-thirds of that number by May of 2022. We have not recovered to pre-pandemic employment levels, and we have an even lower unemployment rate than we did pre-pandemic. After reading Ben Bernanke's book, I'm now convinced that the Fed wants to see unemployment increase, without which they have no hope of breaking the inflationary cycle of wages and prices. They recognize there will be economic fallout, there will be human cost, there will be hardship for families who lose their jobs. The potential for stagflation is there, certainly, since the supply side is being constrained by factors that have little to do with monetary policy and very little to do with the cost of capital. If you listen to Jay Powell's comments carefully, he makes reference to the underlying economic strength as evidenced by the low unemployment rate. He speaks about it frequently, and he speaks of the low rate of unemployment as if it's a problem, without actually coming out and saying it. The current chair of the Federal Reserve has to be fairly guarded in their language. Their words have the power to influence the market in both the short term and the long term. But a fast Federal Reserve chairman is not bound by those same constraints. In my view, after reading Ben Bernanke's book, I believe I understand the relationships that are at the core of the economic models that they are using to explain how our economy functions. The Fed's dual mandate to deliver full employment and to manage price stability. They have to do both, not just one and not the other. If they have to sacrifice one of those two metrics temporarily in order to restore both metrics, I'm convinced they will allow unemployment to rise in order to stop inflation. But understand that price growth won't stop overnight. That's going to mean a real erosion of purchasing power and a real erosion of household income, from which families may take years to recover if they ever do. If you're wanting to see interest rates fall, I suggest you keep an eye out for rising unemployment. I don't believe we'll see interest rates fall until we do. As you think about that, have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.